This section over here is like into it. I think some like 5 or 6 families are going to be started tonight.
There's a huge parallel between building Bitcoin and building the new El Salvador.
So clearly Peter Schiff will not be going to heaven. You've got to get with the rhythm. You've got to understand what it takes to get with the wave and be with one, with Satoshi, and have the faith that we're on the right side of history.
Stocks are going to zero. Gold is going to zero. Everything's going to zero against Bitcoin. Bitcoin is fuck you money. And believe me, I've learned a thing or two on it. When that money printer starts to go burr, I get the hell out of her. Cause I got everything goes to zero is Bitcoin blues. Woo! Everything goes to zero against Bitcoin.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sovereign T Studios. You know, these guys are great guys. I started following them on Twitter. I noticed that the videos are really cool. And they got a great attitude, and we were talking, and we made a video recently, and I hope to do some more videos with these guys. And this is a fine event. It's a fun event, and, you know, this is the time to embrace this country because the United States and Europe and Canada and Australia have abdicated from the stage in terms of offering free speech. Free speech is no longer on offer in these countries. They are afraid of free speech. They don't want to hear what we have to say. They want to keep a monopoly on all the information because information is now the new gold. It's the new wealth. It's the new reality. But guess what? Our information is on Bitcoin and it's unconfiscatable. It's unconfiscatable. It's unconfiscatable. It's uncensorable. It's inflation proof. And now we have our own country, El Salvador, which is becoming a safe haven for free speech. And what's happening in El Salvador, and I expect Stacy to come up here at any moment, but what's happening in El Salvador is the first 5 years, the president went after the gangs. He gave El Salvador a gangectomy, and he removed the gangs, 70,000. Of course, they were an export from the United States. You know, the MS-13 and these gangs are from the prison system in LA. They found their way back to El Salvador, created all kinds of havoc, and now they're locked up. They were extorting about $6 billion a year from the local population in a $28 billion economy. That's 20% of the wealth of the country is being stolen every year by these gangs, and by locking them all up in 18 months, that's $6 billion that go right back into the economy. It's like a 20% dividend. And it goes right to the bottom line because the president is basically about smaller government. He's about decentralized government. And so people actually got a peace dividend. And now, in the second term, the focus is on economic growth. And the president is able to act very quickly, our president here in El Salvador. So let me give you what's happening even in the last week, last 3 weeks. I just started a dialogue on Twitter with Chris Pavlovsky of Rumble about being a safe haven for free speech for Rumble. And in less than 3 weeks, he was having a face-to-face meeting with the president at the president's office. And now we're going to launch a sovereign channel, an El Salvador government channel on Rumble. Right? So this will be English and Spanish, and this will be the only free speech channel in the world. And this has happened very quickly. And so now the Rumble folks are looking at property here. The Rumble folks are thinking about moving here. And this is what's going on in the world of mass communications and media and social media, is that we're dealing with a situation where the monopolists and the oligopolists and those who really have had a free ride now for decades by controlling the communications are panicking. And they also are rolling into and heading into the buzzsaw of rising inflation. So the economy is shrinking and the population's getting more and more strident, more and angrier, and hard to control. And what the Economist magazine euphemistically calls social unrest, which you and I would call rioting, is starting to nip at the heels of all the power centers. And talking to people in the business of communications, they still say that First Amendment is protected in the U.S. And the Congress in the U.S. and the Senate in the U.S., by and large, still supports free speech and still supports the First Amendment. But after this next election in November, that may not be the case. We may not have any more a beachhead in the West for free speech. The U.S. is on the verge of tipping over into full-fledged communism, or whatever you want to call it, but it won't be what we've known the U.S. to be famous for 240 years. So as I've talked to folks here and around the world, it's great to have a plan B and maybe a plan A. And just about 3 years ago, suddenly I was on the couch doing some macrame or baking cookies or something. I forget what I was doing. But Stacy came in the room, extremely excited. And I said, what's going on? And she said, I just had a vision. We're moving to El Salvador. I was like, what? Yes, we have to go. And, well, that's my wife. I wasn't going to be left behind. Ladies and gentlemen, Stacy Herbert.
Yes. Well, first we came here 3 years ago, and just to show you the difference between now and 3 years ago, is there was a Bitcoin conference. So obviously September 7th, 2021. Everything goes by so fast. 2021, Bitcoin became legal tender, and then there's a Bitcoin conference here, and the guy organizing it reached out to me and asked if Max and I would come and speak. And we had been covering this on Keiser Report, and I said, yeah, sure, we'll go. And then 3 days later, he wrote back and he said, we sold 1,000 tickets this weekend. Thank you so much for doing that, because we had only sold 3 or 4 tickets before. And everybody's like, well, if anybody's going to get kidnapped, it'll be Max and Stacy, not us. And I was like, what the fuck? He wrote this to me. I was like, where the fuck are we going? What the fuck is El Salvador? So I was Googled it, and it was homicide capital of the world, don't go. And I was like, oh my God, I'm not going to tell Max this part. So it was oh shit. And we were on the runway in Miami about to take off for the flight, and I messaged my uncle who was in the military, and I said, you might need to check on our house because I think we're about to die. And he wrote back, he's like, what's going on? And I said, we're going to El Salvador. And he said, why? I'm like, we're about to take off. It's too late to explain. So when we landed here, but this is even before the gang war, and all the stuff I read, every single thing, when I Googled El Salvador, 100% of it was negative. All of it was negative. All of it was scary. And, we've traveled through Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, Colombia, Mexico many times. And I was totally unprepared for just how nice Salvadorans are. Everybody was nice. So nice. And I thought, this didn't add up to those headlines of these, decapitators and murderers. So there's like two extremes of Salvadorans. Either they went to the U.S. and were sent back as like decapitators, and now they're all in prison. But everybody here is actually so nice, and we ended up, staying.
Absolutely. And a speaker said earlier, we're into the fourth churning, and all the cycles are negative. You have a lot of negative cycles converging at the same moment in this time. But it's like El Salvador has already been through 40 years of horrible times, and it's actually coming out of the bad cycle. It's the first country out of the shit, really, that has been kind of being baked into the cake for so many decades. And so it has a chance to be a real leader in the world. It's this new shining city on a hill. The Statue of Liberty is a volcano in El Salvador. The president is kind of like John F. Kennedy meets Steve Jobs, and he's extremely smart, and he's attracting the best and the brightest. And I think that the next 5 years is just going to be this real fast-paced rate of change. And so we're all in for this kind of ride.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the one that started that best and brightest. And it was from the very first days that we met President Bukele. And I still have the message where I sent somebody who was working for him as like you can have a Florence 2.0 here. You can have a Renaissance 2.0. Like you can do something extraordinary just based on that guy, right? That leader of the country. He could do that because that's what happened with Florence. It was a guy. It wasn't like Medici created all the art or built those amazing buildings and stuff like that. It was like he inspired people to come build for him. So how we have operated, I run the Bitcoin office, is attracting the best and the brightest. So, Ricardo Salinas was just here. I don't know if you know who he is, but he's like the third richest man in Mexico, right? And the transformation that he's actually one of the very first people we contacted when I started working for the president. Is brought him here 2.5 years ago. And remember, it was weird to have dinner with him just 2 nights ago with the president. And we were 2.5 years ago, I think it was the 24th or 25th of March of 2022. And we had dinner. And then the president, after the dinner, the president tweeted all these photos of all of us. And then the Friday, the assassination started for that weekend of 87 assassinations. And Max and I were here. So it was still quite early in the this transformation of El Salvador into the new El Salvador. And again, we were new here, and there were 87 murders, and we were on, that was the only thing on the president's Twitter feed was us, these photos of us. And the gang war started, because he had gone quiet, and we were just walking around San Benito on our own going I hope this is a normal thing. This is not something out of the ordinary. But it was out of the ordinary. And it was not only the most murderous weekend in decades here, but it was the beginning of something quite extraordinary. The transformation that started that weekend, it was the worst of times that then led to the best of times, right?
Yeah, 87 murders in 3 days. It was a massacre. And we were staying in a very small hotel in San Benito, in San Salvador. And it was the weekend. And we were the only guest in the hotel. And in fact, there was no staff at the hotel. We were completely alone in this hotel. And everybody knew we were there. Everyone pretty much knew. Yeah,
we had already posted 1,000 photos to social media. And people showed up to take photos. And we were this is the beginning of the gang war.
So it was a tough, night, because the idea of gangs jumping in and killing us, became real. And
but we all know how great it is then. But right that moment, what I'm saying is we invited the best and brightest. We invited Ricardo Salinas to come to meet the president and maybe be inspired to build here, but it was broken. This next day, there were all these assassinations. And I remember thinking, this is going to turn Ricardo off, right? This is going to turn Salinas off. And that sucks because we got him here. We got him to fly here. We got to So it was so important to actually get that done, to actually provide the security for all of this growth, the economic growth to happen, because it was not going to happen. It was a big fucking turnoff, right? It was a huge turnoff to bring a guy, worth $15-20 billion. He was talking about setting up stuff then, and then all these assassinations happen the next day, which is a little bit awkward when you're just like, hi, come and invest here, right? But now that doesn't happen. Now there's when somebody's in Miami airport on the runway and they Google El Salvador, there are so many amazing things, right? They're not terrified like we were from 3 years ago. Investors are not hearing stories like they're not showing up for dinner with the president and then there's 87 assassinations the next day. That's not happening, and that's really important to build a country, right? You can't build anything with total chaos and as the murder capital of the world. It's just not possible.
Yeah, that weekend tested our resolve, So, and we came out of that weekend fully resolved that we were going to stay and we were going to follow the president because for a couple of reasons. Number one, Bitcoin wouldn't have put us into that room at that time without a purpose. And Bitcoin is aligning everything up. If everything goes to zero against Bitcoin, that means that everything else is going to line up in a perfect symmetry in a way that Bitcoin can knock down like dominoes. It's the Rosetta Stone of our own consciousness. And so it knows what to do before we do it. And add the fact that we had just met the president and he was such an intelligent, charming guy. And he went essentially to war against the gangs. And this became essentially a Bitcoin war was fought in El Salvador in 2022 and 2023. And Bitcoin won the war against the gangs with President Bukele and everybody praying for this country.
Because it's called low time preference, right? You want to build for the future. That's part of Bitcoin. Actually, how many people here are Bitcoiners? Oh, okay. So it is okay. It is a Bitcoiner conference. Max and I were very early in Bitcoin, right? We started talking about it in 2010. And then in 2011 was the very first Bitcoin conference. And we attended that. So it's important to realize, we're still so early. When Max and I first went to that Bitcoin conference and actually met people in person, like Bitcoiners in person, the early Bitcoiners, we had that same sort of moment. You were like, you were just talking about we're still early in the new El Salvador, and we were like, oh my God, what have we got ourselves into? We actually said the very same thing when we went to the first Bitcoin conference, because we had been doing a financial news show for a while. We had been gold bugs. We went to gold conferences, and there were people wearing suits and stuff like that. And then we went to this Bitcoin conference. It's hard to describe. It doesn't exist anymore pretty much anywhere in Bitcoin, but it was insane. There were freaks and geeks and coders and hackers and people with autism and all that stuff. It was just a room of such crazy images and people that it's hard to describe. Amir Taki being the number one who greeted us there. And, he hosted the conference, and he greeted us at the door like this. And he's like, welcome to the first Bitcoin conference. He's like, I haven't slept for 3 days because I think it's a social construct to steal a third of our lives. And I was like, okay, this isn't like a gold conference. Who the fuck are you? He's like, I organized this. And I'm like, great.
Yeah, super. Well, Bitcoin is subversive, and it was built by cypherpunks to subvert the system, to allow to exist on the total fringes of society by people who didn't want to be part of society or who had been outcast by society. But they wanted to transact, and so the puzzle that was, how do you have digital gold? How do you have internet money had been a question of cypherpunks for 20 years, and the riddle was finally solved in 2009. And so this was the first conference of the gathering of the total outcasts of society and subversive people who got together. They're all and
built. They
and
cypherpunks
building.
write code, right?
Right.
And that's the same thing as building. Like there's a huge parallel between building Bitcoin and building El Salvador, building the new El Salvador. You know, it's famously cypherpunks write code. They don't talk. They don't tell you about what they're going to do. They just write the freaking code and do it. The same thing here with the new El Salvador. You know, like everybody has told President Bukele that you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't fix El Salvador. It's not possible. It's the homicide capital of the world. It'll always be the homicide capital of the world. It'll always be a basket of case. It'll never achieve anything. It's a tiny little country. It's a little thumb. It's like it's destined to always be tiny and small and nothing. And he was like, okay, and just kept building and just kept doing. And they're like, no, it's not possible. That's not happening. That's not happening. The whole time, the same thing happened with Bitcoin. Early Bitcoin, it's like, ha, ha, ha. You're like Financial Times, Bloomberg, the same media publications were saying, it's not possible. You guys are ridiculous. This is stupid money. You guys are freaks. Like, nothing's going to happen. You're money launderers. You're terrorists. You're funding this and that. And the same thing happened. And now, like, okay, BlackRock wants it. We want it. Wall Street wants it. Wait, Donald Trump is saying, no, we're going to be the Bitcoin capital of the world. Like, so the same process is happening with El Salvador. It's very similar. It's like it started out as very small money, and it became, it's like everybody in the world wants it now. And the same thing with El Salvador is 3 years ago, it was so different here, and President Bukele was not this world-famous guy. Bitcoin did shine a spotlight onto him, and that spotlight, he rose to it. Like, he loved the spotlight, and it loved him back, right? And the world got to see what was happening in little El Salvador. And a lot of it was to do with Bitcoin, because that was the thing before the gang war that put the spotlight on El Salvador.
Yeah, and just like everything goes to zero against Bitcoin, I think every other country is going to go to a zero against El Salvador in their own way, because we're entering into this 21st century paradigm where this of economics being based now on Bitcoin and Bitcoin as the base layer. As someone had said already, you have to have Bitcoin as the base layer to build upon, and then you're building something that's solid. Anything that's built on fiat money, of course, can crumble, and just like it's crumbling right now. And so here we have the first mover advantage, and we see the benefits happening every single day. And I think the next 5 years in the president's second term, you're going to see an acceleration of all the positive trends that we saw in the first 5 years.
Yeah, we've said that to him for years now, is like, by attracting the best and the brightest, like, you maintain that first mover advantage by all of the best and brightest, and the builders, the people who actually do stuff and not like say stuff and tweet stuff about what they're going to do. They just actually come and build. Like, get those people. And then the second countries, this is like 3 years ago that we're saying, like, the next countries that adopt Bitcoin. And of course the crash, the big Bitcoin bear market, and all the like FTX and Celsius and all those companies collapsing, it seemed absurd at that time. Everybody's like, ha ha, El Salvador is going to be a basket case. It's all a failure. That was a dumb thing to do. But we were talking about the next countries, and I said, if you get all the best builders here, like, the next countries are going to have to settle for, you know, Cardano or something. They're going to like get the shit coins. They're not going to have the Bitcoiners, because you get the Bitcoiners, they're the builders. Everybody else talks and talks and talks and talks about what their fork and their additions to their new, like, whatever there's, I don't even know what that stuff does outside there, but they talk a lot.
Yeah, and so I think actually we're going to wind it down, and but maybe do a couple of questions for the remaining 5 minutes. If anybody has a couple of questions.
I just have one thing I want to make sure to say, because with early Bitcoin, and I see a few early Bitcoiners here, is, you know, we all spend ridiculous amounts of Bitcoin on things like an iPhone or something like that. And this notion of hodling, it comes out of, well, it was famously that drunk guy, but this notion now that has taken hold is like, you don't want to spend 14 Bitcoin as I did on an iPhone, right? That's like pretty ridiculous. And the same thing with El Salvador. It's really time to hold it, like don't get shaken out. Yeah, hodl El Salvador, because that's why we stayed through the gang war. Like, we were the only two really, like, side by side with the president, famous Bitcoiners, just staying there and saying, like, we've seen this game before in Bitcoin, and we're not going to get shaken out because something amazing is going to happen here.
Absolutely. Any questions in
One right here.
in a couple of minutes that we have?
Yeah.
Okay, yes, sir. The
Yeah.
naked lambada dancer.
Yes, that's me.
You would have a question for
Yeah.
Max and Stacy?
Yes,
Please, please. What is
So
your
the
question,
naked
sir?
lambada dancer is Cuban. I came from communism. My family was separated for many years, just trying to escape Cuba. For us, the United States was a beacon of freedom and all that it is for everybody else. And so I also have a lot of friends in the Bitcoin community. A lot of them are going to places, seeing what's going on over there and saying the United States is falling. And I am not disagreeing, but my question is, in many ways, I have chosen to stay and fight the battle there in whatever ways I think is proper. So my question is, if the U.S. falls, because we see the pressure they can put in countries like France to do what they did to Pavel and so many other places. So if the U.S. falls into the wrong hands, do we really think that a country here or any other country in the world can really stop what will be coming if the United States falls into the wrong hands?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. First of all, what's happening, in my view, is that Bitcoin is, I often ask the question on social media, is it reacting to the chaos or is it causing the chaos? I think in large part it's causing the chaos. And a lot of countries are going to take themselves out of the game by getting into unwinnable wars funded by fiat money. Bitcoin, which is the currency here in El Salvador, it's unconfiscatable, and the country's stacking Bitcoin every day. They've got almost $500 million worth of Bitcoin, and they're stacking every single day. And so they have that beacon of appeal that you, as a Cuban who would escape communism and go to the U.S., you now have people in the U.S. You have 500,000 Salvadorans who fled the country who are now moving back to El Salvador. The diaspora are moving back to El Salvador. People in the U.S. who want a family experience for their family without some of the crazy social justice nonsense that you see in the U.S. are coming to El Salvador because they have strong family values. And you see the numbers at the border. You have reverse migration. Instead of Salvadorans going to the U.S., you have mostly people in the U.S. going to El Salvador. It's reverse migration. So it's coming here. So to your point about, well, can El Salvador withstand an attack, right, if the U.S. decides to attack countries? And, of course, the U.S. is already attacking countries, right? NATO is the U.S., and they're involved in a proxy war against Russia. You've got the U.S. is involved in a proxy war, China and Taiwan. The U.S. is involved in a proxy war between Israel and Iran, right? So the U.S. is totally overextended. They're totally using fiat money to fund it all. They're printing it by their trillions. They've got $34, $35, $36 trillion worth of debt. The economy is sinking under the interest on that debt, which is now over $1 trillion. It's the biggest line on the line item, bigger than the military defense line item. So they are literally shrinking down to nothing because they're killing themselves by printing all of this fiat money, and the inflation's starting to kick in for real. People are noticing that the purchasing power of their U.S. dollar is collapsing. And therefore, and the opposite, of course, is Bitcoin, where the purchasing power is increasing. So, yes, it seems stark, but as any good lambada dancer knows, you've got to get with the rhythm. You've got to hear the music. You've got to read the room. You've got to understand what it takes to get with the wave and be with one, with Satoshi, and have the faith that we're on the right side of history. Come here and experience the beautiful waves. Come here and experience the liberation, the freedom. Let your heart be your guide. Be guided by your passion. Be guided by your heart. Be guided by the beat. I mean, do I have to really spell it out for you? Okay? You're the lambada dancer. Come on up up here. Let's get down.
Do we have time for more questions?
Let's hear some music. Oh, sorry, I've gotten carried away. All right, who else?
Good evening, Max. Good evening, Stacy.
This whole section I like. Look, this section is sleeping. Look at this. They're like, well, yeah, I'm not sure about this guy. He seems crazy. This section over here is like into it. There's like, we're like, I think some like 5 or 6 families are going to be started tonight. In this section, room 47. Here, they got spreadsheets. And they're like, we have to calculate the cost and the, what? Who else? Who else? No, I'm only joking, of course. These are the hidden tiger, crouching tiger, leopards, or whatever. Who else? Question, next.
So I got a question.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Who?
All right, right here.
Oh, yes.
How you doing?
Great.
Good evening, Max and Stacy. Thank you. I got a quick question.
What?
So when Bitcoin hits specific marks that you want to get out on, right? So what do you guys recommend? DCA out, or do you loan against your Bitcoin?
Never sell. Never sell
Okay,
your Bitcoin.
and if so,
You can
never sell. How do we do it?
Use it as collateral to borrow, and then use the borrow to fund what you want to do, but never sell. You just
Never
use it as
sell.
collateral. So here in El Salvador, we have the benefit, hopefully very soon, as was covered in the financial press, of launching a Bitcoin bank, so that people can actually have Bitcoin collateralized loans, and you never sell your Bitcoin. That's the goal.
That's the goal.
Idea.
But right now, it's not really possible. Like,
Yeah, you can do it with a company called Ledn, Ledn.
oh, do you they're decent?
Yeah, they're decent.
Okay.
Okay, check them out. Okay.
Like, do your own research.
Do your own
Okay.
research, but that's a good company. Who else? I'll do one more question. I see the organizers are, I've got fire. I'm on fire suddenly, and they're like, wait a minute. Yes, in the back. What's going on back here? There seems to be an issue with sound. Let's get the question right from this woman's guest. Talk to me.
You said never sell, but we live in a country where it's currency. So how do you, like I was at a conference and I noticed a lot of people were talking about store of value versus currency. So can you talk about that?
Right, never sell, but what about using it as a day-to-day currency? Yes, of course, you can use Bitcoin as a day-to-day currency. Simultaneously, you should always be stacking. So net, you're always adding to your position. Yeah, you can use it for buy groceries here and there, but you got to remember that you need to keep stacking. You need your Bitcoin position to keep growing day by day, because at the end, on the day of reckoning, when we're all at the pearly gates and we meet our maker, and by the way, Bitcoin is good in the afterlife. St. Peter only accepts Bitcoin. And only if you've been good. So clearly Peter Schiff will not be going to heaven. Anyway, I'm off the stage now. I'm not even on stage anymore.
I think you should just keep on going, Max.
I think that I'm finished because I'm not even
Round of
I'm
applause
walking
for
into
Max. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Stacy. So, Max is a big reason why I'm here. He's pioneered the way over here in El Salvador, like he said. He stuck through it, through the hard times, and trailblazed the way for all of us to come down. And thank you, Max, and thank you, Stacy, for that. I appreciate it. Round of applause, ladies and gentlemen.
So the party must go on.